Hey, everybody, welcome to Coffee Code and Chat, where I meet interesting people to chat about everything about tech, freelancing, and all the cool stuff. And today I'm joined with Nicholas, and we're going to start by just having him give us a brief introduction, what he does. And by the way, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, for having me. I'm right now a freelancer. I've been freelancing for the last 4 years. My start into coding was actually data science. So I have a master's degree in data science, but I realized after some time working in data that I was actually more interested in building real products. Like I'd like to build my own apps. I like to build my own websites, all of that. And with data, you're always reliant on, whatever data you actually have coming in. So I started learning web dev and then started my own agency, which is sort of, or was originally supposed to do data science and web dev, but then I just got more and more projects in the web dev realm. And by now I'm basically just doing web dev and very, very little data science.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's interesting that you say that because some people who are learning to code, they're like, where do I go? Do I do data science? Do I do this? And I think one thing that you pointed out here is that you should probably do the thing that interests you and keeps you excited
For
doing
sure.
it. Can you talk a little bit about the transition going from data science to like web dev and building things? How was it like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is incredibly valuable. At least for me, that was the case because I think that when you learn to code, things are incredibly difficult, right? Just learning how to code is just a lot, right? You have to learn so much, and if you do it for like if you learn something just because you think there's going to be a lot of money at the end of it, it's very hard in all those days to keep up the motivation. So for me, I didn't really think about the transitioning. Like I said, I was basically just like the first thing I wanted to do was build like a fantasy football manager on the side. That was my first web dev project, and I never finished it because I couldn't get it done. But at least it kept me going more and more, and then I learned all the things that I needed to do that, and so on. And then it really just when I started freelancing, it just happened to be that there was more demand for building customized websites. And I have to also be honest, like when I started freelancing, I think I wasn't necessarily at the level I should have been at to start those projects, but you just sort of grow with the tasks as well. It's kind of stressful, but you will get there eventually.
Yeah, it's a lot of folks ask me about freelancing. Should I go into freelancing as I'm learning to code? And it's such a tough question to answer for me because I feel like freelancing, it's not just about coding or building projects. There's that aspect of finding clients, client management, what happens if they don't want to pay you? There's like so many different moving parts. So I think it's a very difficult thing. So I always tell people if you get some work experience first and then decide if freelancing is for you. But at the same time, that would be a little bit dishonest answer for me because when I was learning to code, I played a little game because I wasn't sure if I was going to get hired as a developer because
Yeah.
I started learning to code at age of 36. And the way I got started into coding is I used to have my own business. I used to teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I realized I loved spending more time on my WordPress website and like
Yeah.
building it and learning about WordPress that I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I played a little game with myself. It's like, what's going to happen first? Am I going to get WordPress clients because I wanted to build like small business websites for folks local in my area where I lived, or am I, going to get a job as a developer? And so I kind of started doing those in parallel. So, and they both led to that same goal of learning
Yeah.
web development. And I did get few projects with WordPress, but then eventually when I got hired, I was like, oh, let me go this route just so I
Yeah.
could get some work experience because those are two different things. And I guess like my follow-up question to that would be, how do you look at like freelancing versus a job and what like thoughts you would or considerations you would give people? Because I don't think it's like pushing people to do one or the other, but at least like telling people like, hey, these are some of the things to expect and,
Yeah.
think about it.
For sure. I mean, it's a really good question because I think there are quite big differences, and I do agree with you that I think having first some experience as an employee, and for me it was only data science, but I was still working as a developer, and I know the general workflow, and you at least know like, okay, you should at least have like a prod environment, a dev environment, like some general paradigms or concepts that will help you as well that you won't necessarily learn in, I don't know, your Udemy courses when you're just starting out as a developer. So I think it helps a lot to have at least some experience beforehand and also have seen like how you should structure bigger web projects and so on so that you can actually set it up yourself properly. But then on the like I think this like skill wise, one big difference is for sure that when you're freelancing, at least for me, right? That's my experience. Very often you will have to set up projects from scratch. So you have to be somebody that can start from nothing and produce something in a short amount of time. Well, I think as an employee, especially for larger companies, it's way more important, that you just follow the best code practices, that everything is exactly right, structured, and so on. While with freelancing, you're very often going to work with non-technical people that just want to see the website develop in a certain time frame, and you often have trade-offs. And maybe sometimes you're not going to write the best code, but you need to have the code that gets it done. And that's the next thing where when you're an employee, and especially not if you're a manager or something, you often have somebody above you that can sort of protect you, or like you can go to somebody and say like, hey, I can't make this work. When you're freelancing, the only person you can talk to is the client, and the client doesn't want to hear that you can't get something to work. So there's a bit more pressure that you just have to get it done. I think that's kind of the difference. As an employee, you always have a little bit of protection from somebody that, either can fix it for you or can tell somebody else like, oh, this is just not possible.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing of meeting the deadline, and it's funny how if you're a developer versus a freelancer, the way you think differently and the way clients look at what you do differently. As a developer, a lot of times you're like, oh, like this feature that I'm working on, like how do I make it more efficient? How I do this? Where at the end of the day, the client just wants, where the hell is my product? Where's my website? And they just care about you delivering. And so sometimes I think about you could be a great developer, but that might not translate into a good freelancer, because as a freelancer, what you're actually getting paid to do is solve business needs that clients have. And what I was actually going to follow up with, because I know there's so much AI hype and so many cool tools that are being developed, that I feel like a lot of developers, they're like, hey, it's going to take all of our jobs, which I think it's a tool. I don't think it's going to get to that point. At least, who knows the future? Maybe we'll have cyberpunk dystopia, who knows? But with these tools, I feel like if you're like a solopreneur or a developer, you have all these things that you could leverage to help your clients, kind of get stuff done. Do you have any opinions on kind of like the state of AI and your thoughts on it?
I think it's incredible for freelancing, particularly because, at least again, what I'm just talking about my experience, right? But with my clients, it's very often that they have some kind of request that I have never seen before, or that I have to integrate with some kind of tool that I didn't even know. And with this stuff, ChatGPT, Claude, and so on are just amazing if you have to integrate some third party that you don't actually know, because usually it means, or it used to mean, you have to go somewhere and you have to read up all the documentation, and then you go back and forth, you get obscure errors that you don't understand. And now with like the main use cases, for example, I don't know, now a lot of the stuff I have to do is like with Google Sheets, where I have to actually hook into something and then go into line 20 and add like a variable there and stuff like that. All of that is so much easier thanks to ChatGPT and AI. But on the other hand, exactly like you say, like when it comes to, I don't know, the whole development flow, I don't find it as useful as I thought I would find it. I mean, considering that it's now also out for like 2 years, like, I think it makes me a lot faster when it comes to things that you don't do regularly.
Right.
But with the stuff that you know how to do, it's often actually getting you onto the wrong track first.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if you don't know what the code is spitting out or kind of know what you want, you could go down these rabbit holes. And I've had many times where it falls into this loop where it recommends a correction that creates a problem, and then the second recommendation will fix the problem it created, but it'll bring you back to the original problem. So it's like this never-ending loop. So unless you understand the code and you're able to kind of make the difference and changes, like you might get stuck and go down the wrong rabbit holes. And I think like that's a great point you made. Make sure you like use AI with caution and know like its pros and cons. And I think the goal for anybody learning to code, that like I know people say like low code or no code solution. I do agree with that statement a little bit, but at the end of the day, you still need to understand how things work under the hood, because when things breaks or don't work as expected, you are going to have to fix them. So for me, I kind of fall into the same camp. If I know how to do something, I'll just do it. But if I don't, I use AI as a learning tool to kind of talk through the problem I'm trying to solve and see what possible recommendations that it gives. And sometimes like it will give good recommendations. Sometimes they're like, I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like so terrible. But at least now I have enough info to start kind of figuring out how to solve the problem on my own. So I think as a learning tool, it's pretty awesome. In terms of,
But also, actually, sorry,
yeah,
just
no,
to hook into
awesome.
that as well, because
Yeah,
I was talking to another developer the other day, and we both felt that we're quite happy that we learned how to code before AI, because now I realize that also in a lot of stages, I just get very lazy. I think today I was just giving AI some code where I kind of knew I know how to do it, but just like, you just go and do it. And then I was like, no, I'm going to do this properly this time, and I wrote my code, and then I saw the AI code, and I immediately realized the AI code was actually off, right? But I think if I didn't know what to do, I would have just taken the AI
Oh my
code and I would
goodness,
have
yeah.
never looked back. So I think those hours of debugging before AI actually, made you learn a lot deeper what you're coding up now.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I'm in my 40s, and I think being born before this AI boom and this ability to easily access information, I think kind of reminds me that things were a little bit harder at the beginning. And now that you have all these tools that make things easier, I always wonder, are they making us dumber even though we feel we're getting smarter? Because the ease of use is just like, oh, I just do this for you. Oh, you want me to rewrite this here? Or you want me to write this code here? And it's like, I think when I was first starting to use the tools where I was like, oh, I'm just going to rely like a lot on them, especially at the beginning, just to see like what it's like. When the internet would go out, I would be like, I don't know what I'm doing. What is going on? Am I even a developer? And so I was like, wait a second. So it was like a great reminder to be like, hey, like you have the tools, they're tools, and they give you a great power, but like, in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So the idea is it's still on you to not take it for granted and understand that you still have to work on becoming the best developer that you can. And the tools are the tools. They're there or they cannot be there. And so you still need to kind of push yourself to get better. And what I find with AI is that as a learning tool, I find that in the past 6 months that I've been using AI tools to have conversation through the code I'm writing as a learning purpose, it helped me like so much. One example, I was learning graph data structures and I wanted to get a little bit more experience. So instead of doing a lead code where I need to see like a real life application of what the thing is, so I created this little map app that like represents distancing, like with nodes and edges with the graphs. And they helped me to kind of build out an application that at the beginning I had no idea how I did it, but it kind of worked. And then I asked like ChatGPT, like, hey, can you write me a learning outline of all the things I need to learn to understand what this code means? And then I posted into Perplexity, which like crawls the web and gave me the resources. And then I just watched like a bunch of videos and I was like, yeah, then learn about this stuff, came back to my code. I'm like, oh, I get it. Now I know what it did. And then I was able to like make fixes and improvements. So for me, I think using it for your way to learn, but not as a way to kind of solve all your problems by not having you do anything, it's good.
For sure.
Do you think we're ever going to get to a point where there's going to be no need for developers because AI is so powerful? Because the reason I ask this is because I've actually talked to people, and this sounds ludicrous, that quit pursuing development because they feel like there's no point.
No, well, I mean, it's a hard question to ask because nobody knows, right? That's the main thing for now as well. But for me personally, I think I was a little bit scared at the beginning. I don't know when ChatGPT 3.5, and then very shortly after we had 4, and it was like such a big improvement in a very short amount of time. But that's now, I think, 1.5 years or even more long ago. And since then, the only changes really, in my opinion, have been like, I don't know, you now have more context or it's now faster, but like the code quality and everything hasn't improved that much. And also now when I, for example, do like more obscure frameworks or things like, I don't know, for example, Swift, it doesn't have as much training data. So it's a lot harder to work with it. The same thing I found with Svelte. So now that there's Svelte 5, you can't even use any AI really to
Wow.
help with that. Like it doesn't really reason well. Claude does it a little bit, but just because it doesn't have the training data. And I think, but obviously just maybe a hot take, but I think there's just not enough data out there to actually replace the developers today or also in the future.
Yeah. And I was thinking about like, what does ChatGPT actually do? And I think what it does just automates like the search online that you would have done manually, and it just puts it to you in your chat window, or it's guesses what would be, because it is still a random, very very smart random character generator. But what I was realizing is that it just eliminates the step of you going to Stack Overflow, Google, searching the stuff yourself, reading through the stuff yourself. But when you back in the day used to find that code, it didn't mean that it would really be perfect. You still had to understand what I was doing. So I think of AI as just like taking your ability to ask questions and eliminating the steps of going through Google, going through Stack Overflow, unless you really have to. And so like I realized that it's not actually going to replace coders, because from the standpoint where it's at right now, it doesn't make the best code, and sometimes it will break. And if there's no human on that side to kind of keep it in check and fix things, like you could get in trouble really easily. Like for instance, I had my daughter come over. Like this is what people like. They're like, oh, it's going to take over jobs. I'm like, okay, let me put this to the test. I didn't make a video of this, but I'm like, oh man, that's a good opportunity. I said to my daughter who never coded before, I'm like, hey, here's Chat GPT, here's Cursor. I want you to make me a really simple website. She couldn't get 0% of the way. It's just like if you don't have the understanding of development and how to build stuff, even with these tools, you're not going to get anywhere. And so I get really upset when I see the hype on Twitter or YouTube. It's like how I build a $10,000 company with AI, like web dev or like what have you. And then when you look
Yeah.
at those videos and you're like, hey, show me the GitHub so I could see like the actual history of your commits. And then you see it's like, oh, they did this not in 2 hours. They did this in like 2 weeks of like actual,
Yeah.
it's like, it's just so what do you think about like, do you think the hype is like hurting folks or, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, one thing that I do see, and also just again, right, as a freelancer, when you're alone on a project, you realize like how many more things you can now do thanks to AI, and you're also speeding up a lot. So I can see, for example, that some mid-level developer can now maybe replace some of the juniors' work. But I mean, the idea also of hiring juniors is to make them mid-level developers at some point, right? So you do still need all those mid-level developers. But I could see, for example, I was teaching in boot camps before, and to now go into a boot camp to then become a junior developer when right now there's a very saturated market, and that's not just AI, right? But that there's fewer maybe junior roles in the future. That stuff I can see. But again, that AI actually replaces the mid and senior, I think we're a long way off. And I don't know what actually happened to Devin. Do you remember Devin?
I don't know what happened to Devin, but there's a YouTube channel called Internet of Bugs, and he kind of debunked Devin, and that video went viral, and so his channel grew. I actually met with him and had a interview, and I think he kind of showed that it was a farce, and it was just like a way to kind of build excitement and what have you. And I'm sure these tools eventually will get better with like AI agents and stuff like that. And I think to your point, I think there's hype and then there's like reality. And then it's just, I think, understanding how the tools work to kind of be able to know where reality meets hype and to be able to better navigate. And to your point, talk about how as a freelancer, especially if you're like mid-level, you could find the value of how to use these tools to automate some of the tasks that junior developers would do, which would allow you as a mid developer to focus on more important things and move much faster. And that's something that I'm seeing as well. And there is that fear of, hey, if that's the case, and a lot of companies just want to be more productive with least amount of resources, and because AI is able to replace some of these junior tasks, it's like, why not do it? And the question I was going to say, do you think if companies adapt this mindset, that we either not going to have basically a path for junior developers to become mid-level developers, and basically the expectation is going to be for jobs, hey, you need to be a mid-level developer just to get into the door?
Yeah, I think it's very hard to, because I obviously don't see exactly now how the job market is and how many juniors are being hired and so on. The general thing that I had when teaching the boot camps, I found that it got progressively harder to get jobs as a junior, but that's also because everybody at some point really wanted to become a developer. So there's also just that many junior developers out there right now. And I think as well, like, yeah, when everybody stops hiring with like, I mean, the tech market itself was already problematic, that they might be looking rather for people that are already experienced than the juniors. But like I said again, right, I would think that the main reason to actually hire juniors is to upskill them and then have, a better workforce there.
Yeah. And the second part is going to make for this, because of kind of these interesting times we live in. Like I used to argue for the fact that getting your first job is the most important thing.
Yeah,
Getting that
for sure.
experience makes sense. But now, like seeing like how some of these companies lay folks off and how there is no real job security outside of you being really good at your craft and being able to kind of bring value to companies to get hired. And now I'm like, you know what? I have my YouTube channel. I have like a second thing that I'm trying to do on the side
Uh-huh.
as like a fallback, like for myself. And freelancing is something that I always consider if I were to lose my job, like, can I freelance like to make the difference? And obviously nothing is easy in life, But I'm realizing that we live in a world where you can't just say like, I'm going to have a job and I should probably have a skill. And freelancing, I think, is a good one, even though it's so difficult to learn. But I feel like for you not developing those entrepreneur skills to think like a freelancer, even if you don't go into it, it's almost like detrimental in today's society. Like even if you don't become a freelancer, like the same skills are very applicable to have that mentality, like when you go on job searching, because like I think of a job as your client that's paying you the most, and it's like, but the principal supply. So like, what are your thoughts on like, this kind of time and kind of where things are about freelancing? And is this something that you would like recommend for folks? And like, what caveats would you give?
Yeah. I mean, once again, great question. I think I once read something as well. I don't know from which book it was, but it was basically comparing also the mindset of somebody that is on a steady income and somebody that is constantly looking for jobs, like basically freelancing, right? And it was sort of saying like, as an employee, you kind of never worry that much about your skill set or what happens after this job, because this job is always steady. While as a freelancer, if you have like periods where it goes up, you're kind of thinking like, oh, maybe I should invest more time in this skill to actually make even more money of that, or get more job security, because there's obviously a niche that I can supply. But on the other hand, when it goes down and you suddenly don't get specific jobs anymore, maybe let's say I would have started as a data science freelancer, and then I realized like, wait, there's not that many jobs for me out there. Maybe then I would have transitioned to web dev, which is something as an employee wouldn't have done, right? So
Yeah.
just this is one of the things I think you automatically do when, instead of a monthly salary, you keep, you basically have to write invoices, and sometimes you're gonna write fewer invoices than other months. That was the first part. So generally, whether people should look into freelancing as well. I mean, I love it. I think it's something that also has to do a little bit with mindset, because it can definitely be more stressful already, with the reason that I gave before, where you're the main person to deliver this and you don't really have protection from anything. You're also the one, if the production server is down, it doesn't matter whether you're sleeping right now or anything, you have to fix it and you have to find a way to fix it. And I think definitely like it can be more stressful. So it's not necessarily for everybody. I personally love it because already you start, I don't know, you just start thinking in different ways. The thing that I mentioned before, with like constantly thinking like, oh, in which direction could I go? Or with you, for example, starting a YouTube channel, starting a Udemy channel, or creating a Udemy course and stuff like this, right? There's extra things that maybe as an employee wouldn't really do. But here now, because you can also divide your time freely, maybe you have some weeks where you automatically don't have as much client work, so you can go into those endeavors as well. And yeah, for sure. I mean, if you don't have a lot of job security, it could help as well to already start freelancing on the side a little bit by finding small clients that, give you a little bit of a security net as well in case something happens.
Yeah, and I really like appreciate the fact that you're saying that it might not be for everybody, and sometimes it's very easy for folks and to give advice from what worked for them as that's the absolute truth. That's how you do it. But I think it's a good takeaway for anybody that's going to watch this is that you have to find your path that fits your mindset, how you think about things, and what makes you excited every day, to wake up and work hard, develop the skill that you need to continue doing what you're doing. And for me, I feel like freelancing like excites me, but at the same time, it's also
I
scary
mean,
because
you
like you
build a
said,
lot, no?
I
Like,
do build,
I constantly see your Twitter, and it's like you build
I
just
built
like
all the, I
prototypes.
think I have ADHD. So I'm like, man, to the next thing, to the next thing. I do want to, so I read this interesting thing where I don't know exactly who did the study. I'm sure I'm going to misquote, but there was a study that they checked quantity versus quality, what produces better results. And so I'm sure there's more to this nuance, but basically they found people who produce more stuff and iterate quicker without focusing on quality ended up building better products. And I think I realize it's because the faster you fail, the faster you learn. And with every learn opportunity, there's improvement. And so what I'm trying to push myself to do is to build as much as I can. And even if it doesn't turn into anything, it's like, oh, it's complete garbage. It's like, no, that was a learning opportunity that I took. And I now know one thing more than I did before taking out that project. So that process through fast failure and iteration is actually helping me to improve my development skills. And another thing I added to this recently is because as a like someone who started web development like really late, I was able to catch myself and found out that there's times where I build the same thing. It may just look like different. It's like, oh, it's a website for yoga teachers. That's a website for cats or what have you. But it's like, it's the same thing. Nothing wrong with that. Like you can have a systematic approach, like especially if you're freelancing, to allow you to build websites quicker. But from learning standpoint, I was like, I should probably do one thing different with every project that leads me to kind of step out that comfort zone just a little bit. So I was actually going to say, being a freelancer, how do you approach learning and what has worked for you?
Yeah. So I think by now I have one main client and I'm basically learning while doing, and they accept that as well. Like they basically, what happened was that I started working for them 3 years ago when it was just two people from their side, and they were both the founders. And that company has now just grown and grown, and it's growing like crazy at the moment. So I was like the one man IT department for now 3 years. Now we're onboarding other people as well. But it meant that I always had to automatically learn new things as well, which once again, outside, like if you're just doing your hobby projects, you're probably not going to be asked for these type of things. But a lot of the stuff that I just picked up were kind of from business needs, right? They came from this thing of, okay, now we need to connect to this API, or now we need to work with this, or we have to integrate that. And now we need a whole service area for all of our clients that needs to be connected to our API and stuff. And you start building more and more complex things. And that's the job thing, which I think is teaching me most in terms of like system designs and stuff. But when it comes to other frameworks, I completely agree with you as well. I love building, and I always love to figure out like what different thing can I build or can I learn? Because I always think that as a developer, the more things you know, the more times you're going to see the same concept repeated in a slightly different way, and it makes you understand it so much more. If you only learn JavaScript and only React, some things will just not click the same way as when you also learned like 2 or 3 other frameworks where you saw the same thing, but implemented in a different way. So I always try to learn a bit more, or like mobile development and so on. But it's definitely something you have to push yourself. And with that stuff, I also need a motivation. So for me, with mobile development, I just wanted to have my own app on the App Store. So that then I have to figure out how can I do that. And then I could have done React Native with JavaScript, but the same way that you said, I don't want to use JavaScript for everything. I'd like to learn something new. So then it's Swift, then it's Flutter. It's definitely something you have to push yourself. And for me, I also need that a little bit extra motivation of like wanting to build something new and cool, but with, something to learn as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when you think about learning new things, it almost seems like what you're saying is that the ability to learn is like a skill in itself, to be able to basically get good at learning so you could pick up new things. So are there any like strategies that do you have like a very structured approach to learning, or is it like very organic, like where you're like, let me just try to build this thing, and then once you encounter a problem, you're like, okay, let me tackle this? Because I know some people, they like to have very structured, like I'm gonna outline all the things that I need to learn to get this done. What approach do you take?
Yeah, I think you and me might be quite similar with this. So this might be just echoing what you're saying. But for me, the main thing is always building. The thing that taught me the most was always to build the actual application that I had in mind originally. I think I usually start with courses. So I try to find out like who's giving me a sort of grand overview over the framework or technology that I want to learn. But I usually don't watch the whole course. I sort of go through the basics. And then when it comes to building, I already have something in mind that I would like to build. And then I get started with that so that when I then get stuck, I don't just have AI, but I also have a reference that I can go back to this course and look at like, I don't know, I have trouble data fetching or something like that. I'm going to check how to actually do this in the framework. But the main thing is always building.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned like courses, because like when I first started learning, I used to take the courses and I would just copy everything like the person on the course does. And then when something breaks, at that point, I was still so new to development, I had no idea how to fix it. So I'd literally delete the whole project and start from fresh, because I was like, I have no idea what's wrong. I have no idea what's wrong. But now I'm at a point where every time I see a course, I see what they want to build, and I'll try to build it first. And then I'll watch the video to see like, how did they solve it? And if it's like in my, like, I don't do it all the time, but I try. This is how I like try to push my learning. And then like, if they did it way better than I do, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to learn. But if it's like, sometimes like, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I like my approach better. And there's still, and again, it really depends. Like it's the topic like familiar to me or not. If it's something brand new, like for instance, I recently, just for fun, wanted to learn this concept of micro front ends. and I have a friend who's really deep into it, I know nothing about it. So for me, like, even if you told me how to start building one right now, I'll be like, not sure. So like, but it's just kind of cool, like that we live in the world where if you have an idea of something that you want to build or learn, you have all the resources available to you. And speaking of, I do want to talk about your amazing course you have on Udemy that you created. But first, I just want to say, when you work on a project, how do you pick the tech stack that makes sense?
Wait, there were a couple of things that I also wanted to say. First of all, actually, yeah, with the course stuff as well, I had the same thing as you, where I used to watch it all by like just what the instructor did, and then I copied it, and then I was like, okay, now I'm going to build my own thing, and I just couldn't. I could never do what I wanted to do because I didn't really understand it just from watching. So yeah, that's why also now I'm saying building it. And the second thing of how to pick the tech stack, I think it really depends on the project. So I have on my own YouTube channel, I don't know if you saw some of those videos, but I try to build projects very quickly, and I've always built like these kind of MVPs, and it depends on what I want to build. So first of all, if it's a mobile app, obviously you have, a different tech stack than for desktop or web app. And then I usually try to make my life medium difficult. So I try to pick the best stack, but also something that I don't know yet, so that I learn while building. So most of the time, for example, if I say on the front end, I pick a new framework, I'm going to build on the back end with what I'm familiar with,
Yeah.
and vice versa. I think that's actually everything.
That yeah, that makes like a lot of sense. And one of the challenges I had, especially at the beginning, is when you learn a framework like Next.js or even Strapi. And the reason why I mentioned that is because I love Next.js. I love Strapi. I build everything with Strapi and Next.js. Sometimes, like, you might have an approach where, like, well, here's the thing that I know well. So every project, probably this is the
Yeah.
best option, which is not the right attitude. And what, because it could lead you down these pathways that you find too late that it was like the wrong approach. And I had somebody talk about where they were building an app with React Native because they thought it was going to give them everything that they needed. And they felt like, oh, because we have React developers, it'll be easier for our team. And then like 60% of like time, money invested, they're like, ooh, that was a wrong mistake, because for us, we needed to have a native Apple app for the features that it had, and they actually had to scratch the whole project. And so I think if you're looking to build something, understand what you're trying to build first, and then do your due diligence to figure out what is the most appropriate technology. Even though I might be biased for like Strapi or any React framework, it might not be like the solution for that particular product or problem, even though I feel like 80% of things could be built with Next.js and Strapi, but whatever. That's just my thought. And so that's a great point. And I was actually definitely, you'll share a link to your YouTube channel and your course, but I did want to talk about like, so you build a very cool course, and why I liked it. It was called, and I'll put a link in the description for folks to check it out. It's called Freelance Stack, Real Projects with Next.js and Strapi. And to me, like just that alone resonated, because it's like, how do I go from start to finish to build a complete project? And what I really liked about the course is that you started from like Figma, like how to think about the design, and then you walk through using Next.js and Strapi to build the final project. So the first thing I want to ask is like, what motivated you to kind of make a course? And then I'm going to also ask, well, how did you discover Strapi
Yeah.
and why you chose
So
Next?
what motivated me originally was just that when I started out freelancing, so I knew I was going to want to go from employee to freelancer, but then when I looked up a lot of the stuff, I was like, why would anybody hire me and not just build like a WordPress website or something like that, right? And there's not actually that much material out there, right? Like everybody's just saying, oh, you just need to be that much better, or like, you need to be a like great developer and so on. But that doesn't really answer the question, because most of the time the question is, what value do you bring to the client that they hire you instead of building their own website, right? And so for me, when I think of like marketing websites or landing pages, I often didn't see how a solo developer could provide that page in a way that, it's still budget friendly, but obviously higher quality than any WordPress bloat and so on you could have. And I couldn't really figure that out for quite some time. So then now the big client that I was talking about before, what they wanted to do was they wanted to not have me code the whole website, but they wanted to put their own content
Yeah.
into that page. And that's what made me start looking into different headless CMS solutions. And at that time, I really liked Strapi, and I just tried it out. And at the beginning, I wasn't even aware of like how much you can do with it, because at the beginning, it was sort of like, oh, okay, we want to have different landing pages and we want to change the headline. But then at the end, as it always does with these projects, it was suddenly, we want to have a fully customizable blog where you can basically create new pages on this website completely just from Strapi. And I was like, I mean, when I learned about this and how to do it in Strapi, I once again, you don't find a lot of resources to do at that complexity level, that kind of project. And I realized also that it was sort of the answer to the question of like, how can you as a solo developer give a non-technical person a CMS without you having to code up a backend, and on the other hand, deliver a front page that looks exactly how they want it to have it in their designs, and you still really only have to write the HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript to feed in the data. So I
Yeah, no,
basically just wanted to, sorry, I wanted to basically create the course that I would have liked to have when I question like why would anybody hire me?
that's interesting that a lot of times because I kind of fall into the similar thing. For instance, I'm learning music right now and I have a little keyboard, but I also have this thing called Ableton Push that represents the notes in an 8x8 grid. And I had really hard time like figuring out how do you play like certain chords on the push because it's just 8x8 grid. So I had a problem. I was like, I wish there was a resource that showed all the chords that you could like, or all the keys or notes that you put on the piano layout, and it automatically shows it how you would play it on your push. And so I kind of created that app. It's kind of like same for you. You're like, I wish there was this resource for me to use. And it's like, I'll go and create it. And what's interesting about that is if it's a problem for you, like, or the thing that I had a problem for me, that means there's other people that probably are experiencing the same thing. And by the way, that's kind of like what I go to as my first kind of like, if I were to build a SaaS product or something, like where would I get ideas? And I would start like, what problems do I have? Because maybe there's other people that have them as well. So that's like really, really, really cool. And because you did mention WordPress and like, Strapi being a headless CMS, I did want to take your take on WordPress, especially. I don't know if you've been following up with the drama, but and everything that's going on. But I feel like as a freelancer, again, picking the right tool for the job, and sometimes like Squarespace might be that solution. So like, what are your thoughts on like WordPress, Squarespace, other like page builder that exists versus like something that's a little bit more custom, like you did with, Next.js and Strapi?
Yeah. I absolutely have nothing against any of those page builders. But the main thing for me is that I really like developing, and the experience for me, I had some clients at the beginning that had a WordPress page, and I found like, yeah, you get started a lot quicker, but then if you want to do something more custom, it just gets so incredibly annoying, and you interfere so often with the theme that you're picking and so on, that at the end, the time you're actually saving is not that much, especially if you're quite quick at CSS and all that stuff. You can quickly do your own designs and so on. And what I also don't like, you don't have the full control, right? It's like when you build your own stuff, there's almost nothing you cannot do. But with WordPress, you will hit those borders. So for me, something like a headless CMS plus your own JavaScript front end is my happy place, basically.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to spend now. I mean, I'm working now like 40 hours a week or something, right? I wouldn't spend that, adjusting WordPress themes or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah, and I feel like the same because I started with WordPress and I realized just number one, keeping everything in one language, JavaScript, and Strapi does use React and Node, and basically like keeping it the same language makes it easier. And also when I look at Strapi, I look at it, it's like 10,000 hours somebody else did to create this thing for me that I don't have to build, that I could use for free, which is amazing. And what's cool, like I was more of a front-end developer and I'm slowly like trying to become full stack, but I started trying to learn full stack by like building like node projects or using Express, and like that was cool. But when backend started to click for me is when I started working with Strapi, and I got started with Strapi like out of the box. You could just do so much. You don't need to write any custom code. But then I learned that you could customize Strapi through writing custom code or creating plugins. And then through looking through their open source code and to kind of see how they structure the project, I was like, this is how backends work. And I kind of actually learned about backend development through trying to do more custom things with Strapi. And to me now, it's like, and again, I might be biased because I work at Strapi, but the way I got hired at Strapi is because I was using Strapi beforehand for everything that I was building because I loved it. But to me, it's like I literally start like, what's the problem? Can I solve it with Strapi? And then most likely the answer is like, yes, I can. And so I have been, at least for the type of projects I build. And I realized like, hey, if I need an extra like functionality, like for instance, I do a lot of YouTube, so I'm very lazy at like trying to like write my descriptions for my YouTube videos or summarize my videos. So I build a plugin in Strapi where you could just put the URL of the video and it will summarize it for you and write the description
Nice.
and automatically save it to your collection type. And I was like, this is amazing. And so to me, like this idea of finding a tech stack that doesn't fight you as a developer and allows you to build things quickly makes sense. And I'm happy that Strapi has been that for you as well. And another thing I was going to say with WordPress, I don't know if you experienced like when people wanted to move away from WordPress, the migration process seems to be very difficult because one of the challenges because I tried this experiment like actually a couple of weeks ago, I realized that a lot of the data in WordPress is literally stringified HTML with the data in it. And so if you want to move that somewhere else, you got to parse that HTML, you got to take out that data. And so it becomes like a migration nightmare. Except this is like I thought I had, and somebody confirmed it. Like I saw, I don't know if you heard of this platform called N8N. It allows, it's pretty cool. You should check it out. I'll send you a link. It allows you to build these automated AI workflows, and it's open source, so you could like self-host it. So instead of writing like custom migration scripts, like the way you would migrate like WordPress somewhere, a database migration script, or like in my case, I had to write a script that would parse the HTML and take out all the necessary data. It was a pain in the butt. They basically created a workflow where they just had a web crawler crawl the website, get all that data out, and then format it into a CSV format that was like exactly structured the way they wanted to. And then they were able to just iterate through that CSV, or you could do JSON and then use like Strapi API to just push the data to Strapi. I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. Like utilizing the power of AI to help you parse the data. It's pretty nice.
Nice.
Yeah, so if you haven't checked out, definitely check out. So I guess like while we're on this like freelancing talk and about like building cool things, what skills or things would you recommend folks should know as a bare minimum to get started with freelancing?
Yeah. I know we were now mostly talking tech skills, but also just one thing that I was thinking the whole time earlier, but forgot to say. I think for me, my first few jobs actually just came about because somebody else messed up before. And then you sort of come into the meeting with somebody that is non-technical, and it's the interviews are never like, oh, I don't know, inverse a list or something like that. But instead it's going to be, do I like the freelancer that is sitting in front of me? Do I trust them with this job? And does the freelancer understand me? Right. So because those non-technical people will usually not ask you any tech questions. So for me, one of the key things I think at the beginning was also just being able to build trust in like short meetings and make the other person feel that I understand what they actually need. Because once again, they won't really care whether you build the site with Strapi or Sanity or even WordPress. It doesn't matter to them as much as just delivering it. So I think a huge aspect also of freelancing is being able to communicate to people that are non-technical, which is also something you might learn as an employee when you have to talk to people in other teams and stuff. So that experience comes also in handy there. Otherwise, in terms of tech skills, I would say you should definitely know what you're doing because you're the one responsible, right? So you should at least have a level of understanding of you should never be in a position where you are worried about your API keys being exposed or something like that, right? Those basic things, you should understand what is being rendered on the server, what's being rendered on the client, which framework you're using. Doesn't matter at all, I would say. You should be able, though, to cover a lot more ground than when you're a very specialized employee. So I think it probably helps you to be a full stack developer, at least if you want to build websites for clients. On the other hand, there are also lots of people that just build web crawlers or scripts like that and just apply to different roles on Fiverr and have like a very strong niche. The other day I was building, I don't know if you ever heard of Foxy Card, but I'm building like an integration for an e-commerce store that can't use Stripe with a technology that I think is like 20 years old. And I literally told the client like, hey, I think it might be better for you to just look on Fiverr And there are people that literally just know this, right?
Specialize.
Which is,
Wow.
yeah, exactly. And then they do charge quite a lot of money for that as well. But you can find your niche as well. So I think the main thing for you is actually if you bring some value, if you can do some things that other people can't, you're already in a good place. And then you just have to find a space you want to work in. If it's websites, pick any framework you want. If it's something more niche, that's probably fine as well, as long as there's a market.
Yeah, and you just brought it like through everything you said, like so valuable, so awesome. But one of the things that stood out is how you talked about this ability of having good like social skills and being able to talk to non-technical users. And you point out that they don't care how you do it. They just want their thing. Whereas the developer, so we care about the framework, we care about how we do it. And that's like kind of that divide that it's like you have to be able to cross to be able to good freelancer, because at the end of the day, they don't want to hear this technical jargon. They just want to know, I have a store. I want people to be able to buy my merchandise. How can you do this in this time frame? Perfect. And you also like brought an interesting point from that is that at the end of the day, whenever there's a service, you're interacting with a customer. And what that customer doesn't want to do, they don't want to do that work themselves. And so that actually kind of answered my question when you said that, like, would AI replace developers? And it might replace what we do as developers, but at the end of the day, no one will want to do that themselves. No one will be like, oh, I need to type a prompt to freaking create this. Why? I'm going to pay somebody to do that. So I think there's always going to be that job like that, like, hey, I want my time. I don't want to do it. I'll pay you money. You do it in the most basic sense. And I also had this happen to me because I have a YouTube channel and I needed someone to make shorts for me. And they like gave me this like deal. We'll make 4 shorts a month for $50. It's like, that's cheap as hell. Like, what's their secret? And of course, like they were using an AI program that exists that I could buy a subscription for and I could do it myself. And so my friend asked me, so like, what'd you do? Did you pay them or did you get your AI thing? And I was like, no, like, why the hell would I spend my time opening that AI program, putting my video in there? That's not convenient for me. So yes, I can't technically do that. For the shorts at the time, I was like, just here, there's $50. You give me 4 shorts, because like I'm paying for the convenience of me not doing that work. And so I feel like people that worry about jobs, like, or developers or what have you, like, as soon as like people will always pay for getting back free time and convenience. And that's why I feel like there's a lot of these new freelancers coming out who are leveraging AI to build things quickly to deliver, solutions to their clients, that they kind of found this like, hey, like we're solving a problem and we have the tools that help us allow to move quicker, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think you also pay for example, just the security of knowing that somebody else will take care of it if something fails as well. Like those things that you mentioned. And I think also, for example, Zapier, right, are like tools that can help non-technical people or people that are not video editors in that case. But they, for example, with Zapier, right, you very often have the thing that after some time, just some webhooks start breaking and so on, right? And you if you're not technical, you first of all won't know whether it's your fault, whether you set it up the wrong way. You're not sure where to look at because you don't really understand the infrastructure. So even if there's a tool that makes it possible for you, doesn't mean that it makes it sort of comfortable for you. Never as comfortable as like paying a freelancer that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, I think like you're dropping like so many gems, because this is something as developers we don't think, because as a developer, you think, what's your skill? I know JavaScript, I know React. At the end of the day, your client doesn't care for that because that's not what they're paying you for. But you might think they're paying you because of like your development. So they're paying you for what you said, this peace of mind, knowing that their website is going to be built, knowing that they have someone who could fix things. They're literally paying for not having headaches. And I think if you're going to be a freelancer, if you understand that one part you just said, you're going to, like, you're definitely on the right path, because at the end of the day, you're paying for having peace of mind, for you able to be able to sleep at night, that you made, like you don't have to worry about your website or your product or what have you. And this is why I feel like if you are a developer and you might be the best one, you might not be best at freelancing if you don't understand that concept.
Yeah, agreed.
Before we go, I want to say thank you, Nicholas, for being here. I think I learned a lot. I think our viewers are going to learn a lot. So the last thing I like to say, are there like, before you go, are there any closing thoughts on anything that can bring additional value to what we already discussed today?
I mean, maybe it's going to be a bit repetitive, but I really think, again, like the main thing for me is just, I think when you're freelancing or when you're a developer, you should just build things, and at the front of your mind, it should always be, you want to create something, you want to create something cool. It should make you really happy when you be able to ship websites and show it to your friends, or even like paying customers. Like that's like the coolest thing ever. So I would just say, like, yeah, just if you're interested in freelancing, building stuff will help you a lot. And also, if you want to reach out to me, just always message me. I'm really happy to help anybody that is actually interested in getting into freelancing.
Yeah, and I'm going to make sure to share your link to your YouTube channel, your social, and ways for folks to find you. But I'm really glad that I got to meet you and have this conversation in real life, even though it's over the internet. Thanks so much. And thank you all for watching.